Ladies and gentlemen, let's talk about something that's quietly reshaping our love lives. And no, it's not dating apps, ghosting, or even the fear of commitment. It's deeper. It's about how modern men are thinking and feeling, and what that means in a world where relationships seem to be falling apart faster than they're coming together. We are living in what some call a relationship recession, a time where people are more disconnected, more disillusioned, and more divided than ever in love. And at the heart of this, men. Not because they're to blame, but because they're changing quietly, internally, and sometimes invisibly. You see, modern men are experiencing a psychological shift. They're being told to be strong, but also vulnerable, to lead, but not dominate, to be ambitious, but emotionally available. That's a lot of conflicting messages, and many men are frozen by the paradox. They're not sure what role they're meant to play anymore, not in society, and especially not in love. Some have stopped trying altogether. Others are playing outdated roles that don't work, and many are lonely, not because they can't find someone, but because they don't feel seen, appreciated, respected. We don't talk enough about male emotional illiteracy, or how men are often raised to suppress, not express. And now, women want connection, depth, emotional partnership. That's fair, but we never taught men how to give it. The result? Misalignment, disappointment, silence, ghosting, rejection, loneliness. But here's the truth no one tells you. Good men are out there. They're just afraid of saying the wrong thing, of being misunderstood, of not being enough. And when we demonize men or treat vulnerability as weakness, we drive them deeper into isolation, and the recession gets worse. So the answer? It starts with understanding, with empathy, with unlearning old rules and writing new ones. Ones based on clarity, honesty, courage, and emotional fluency. Because we don't need perfect men. We need present men. We need men who are willing to try even if they don't always get it right. And we need women who can call men forward, not just call them out. This isn't about blame, it's about building something better. And that starts here, with each of us. In today's world, modern men are facing an identity crisis. One that's rarely spoken about openly, but deeply felt. For decades, traditional masculinity dictated clear roles. Be the provider, suppress emotions, lead decisively, and protect at all costs. These expectations were rigid, but they provided a kind of blueprint. Now that blueprint has been torn up and rewritten, but without handing men a clear, updated guide. They're being told to evolve, but not always shown how. As a result, many men are stuck between who they were raised to be and who the world now expects them to become. This internal tug-of-war can be emotionally paralyzing. The modern landscape is asking men to be more emotionally available, more collaborative, more in touch with their inner worlds. These are powerful shifts, but they come without the cultural scaffolding or support systems that women have spent generations building, while many women have communities, conversations, and content that support their emotional evolution. Men often lack those safe spaces. Vulnerability is still in many circles quietly coded as weakness. Sensitivity is seen as suspicious. And that leaves a large portion of men feeling unqualified to engage with love in a way that's demanded of them today. They want to show up better, but often don't know what better even looks like anymore. At the same time, the traditional markers of masculinity, financial success, decisiveness, stoicism, aren't just being challenged, they're being deconstructed, sometimes aggressively. Men who lean on these traits are often labeled as outdated or even toxic, without being offered alternative ways of asserting their value. This can create confusion, resentment, or silence. Some withdraw, others double down on old models, but many sit quietly in the middle, unseen, unsure, and emotionally homeless. They're not fighting evolution, they just don't feel included in it. This role confusion doesn't just affect how men see themselves, it directly impacts how they relate to others, especially in intimate relationships. If a man doesn't know whether he's supposed to lead or follow, be strong or vulnerable, initiate or wait, he hesitates. And in the realm of dating, hesitation often looks like apathy, disinterest, or detachment. But what we often interpret as a lack of effort is sometimes just a lack of clarity. Modern men are not necessarily unwilling to show up in meaningful ways. They're just afraid of showing up the wrong way. And without clear models, support, or language to guide this transformation, many are stuck in roles that no longer work and relationships they genuinely want to succeed in. We often mistake men's emotional silence for a lack of depth, when in reality it's a sign of underdevelopment, not absence. From a young age, many boys are taught, directly or indirectly, that vulnerability is a liability. Crying is punished. Talking about feelings is dismissed. Sensitivity is teased. These moments don't seem monumental at the time, but they shape a man's emotional world profoundly. Over time, many men learn to internalize pain rather than express it. They become fluent in the language of stoicism, but emotionally illiterate in their inner lives. It's not that men don't feel, it's that they've never been taught how to process or communicate what they feel in ways that are healthy or intimate. As men grow older, this emotional gap doesn't close, it widens. Society often rewards emotional restraint in men. In the workplace, in friendships, even in families, emotional detachment is often misread as strength. The problem is, when relationships require emotional presence, true vulnerability, attunement, and emotional risk, many men come up short, not because they don't care, but because they've never practiced. And like any untrained muscle, when emotional expression is finally required, it feels foreign, weak, and even unsafe. This is why some men shut down in the face of emotional confrontation, or withdraw when asked to open up. Not because they don't want connection, but because the tools to build it were never handed to them. The modern dating world, however, demands emotional fluency. Women today aren't just looking for providers or protectors, they want partners, men who can listen, share, reflect, and empathize. But when emotional vulnerability hasn't been nurtured, many men feel disoriented in these dynamics. They may overcompensate by trying to fix instead of feel, problem solve instead of empathize, or retreat when emotional intensity rises. This misalignment leads to miscommunication, frustration, and disconnection. Not because love isn't present, but because the emotional bandwidth to express it hasn't been fully developed. And sadly, these moments are often misinterpreted as indifference or immaturity, when they're more accurately signs of emotional inexperience. It's also worth noting that men often do express vulnerability, but in coded, indirect ways. Humor, sarcasm, silence, or even anger are frequently emotional disguises for fear, insecurity, or shame. A man might not say, "I'm scared you'll leave me," but he'll get distant when he feels threatened. He won't say, "I feel unworthy of love," but he'll sabotage a connection before it gets too deep. These patterns are not signs of emotional absence, but emotional compression. The vulnerability is there. It's just buried under years of conditioning that taught men to hide it rather than hold it. And until we recognize that, we'll keep misreading men's silence as lack of love, instead of what it really is. Unspoken fear. We are living in what many are calling a relationship recession, a steady decline in the number of meaningful, lasting romantic partnerships, especially among young adults. But this isn't just about fewer dates, delayed marriages, or rising breakup rates. These are just surface indicators of a deeper problem: disconnection. We are more connected than ever in the digital sense, yet more emotionally detached in real life. The problem isn't a lack of access to people, it's a lack of emotional access to each other. We scroll through curated profiles and filtered versions of others' lives, but struggle to sit in the discomfort of real vulnerability, real presence, and real effort. And this widespread disconnection is not only eroding relationships, it's redefining how we relate. At the heart of this disconnection is an emotional mismatch. On one side, people want depth, presence, partnership, and emotional availability. On the other, many individuals, especially men, have not been given the tools to meet those desires. As emotional standards in relationships rise, rightfully so, the capacity to meet those standards hasn't evolved at the same pace. The result? Relationships that feel like mismatched dance partners. One person trying to move forward emotionally while the other can't keep up. Not because they don't want to, but because they're emotionally winded. This isn't just a gender issue, but for many men especially, it becomes a repeated pattern of confusion, disappointment, and self-doubt. Disconnection also stems from the way we now approach dating itself. Modern dating culture often emphasizes choice over connection, speed over depth, and image over intention. We're inundated with options, but that abundance can make us less willing to invest deeply in any one person. Commitment begins to feel risky. Vulnerability feels premature. Many people become caught in a loop of brief, low interactions, never quite reaching the emotional depth needed for a sustainable connection. This is especially disorienting for men who already struggle with vulnerability. In a climate that promotes emotional detachment and self-protection, opening up can feel not only unnatural, but unsafe. What's more, many people, men included, are carrying invisible wounds from failed relationships, betrayals, or simply never having seen love modeled in a healthy way. They are emotionally disconnected not by choice, but by conditioning. Without healing those wounds or developing the language to articulate what they need, individuals become guarded, defensive, or emotionally numb. They may long for love, but feel fundamentally unprepared for it. And this internal disconnection bleeds outward, creating dating patterns that reinforce the very loneliness and disconnection they want to escape. The relationship recession then isn't just a social trend, it's a reflection of how poorly equipped many of us are, emotionally and relationally, to build what we still deeply desire. Rejection has always been a part of dating, but for modern men, it carries a deeper psychological weight than it once did. In today's emotionally heightened and socially aware environment, the stakes feel higher. Many men are afraid not just of hearing no, but of being misunderstood, labeled, or dismissed altogether. Rejection no longer feels like a momentary bruise to the ego. It can feel like a blow to their identity. With conversations around emotional availability, gender roles, and power dynamics growing louder, men often feel that a single misstep could not only cost them connection, but also trigger criticism or judgment. This fear leads to hesitation, withdrawal, or preemptive detachment, not because men don't care, but because they're overwhelmed by the pressure to get everything right. This heightened fear is also tied to a growing insecurity around worthiness. As emotional standards in relationships have risen, many men, especially those who haven't been given emotional tools, feel they're being measured by criteria they never learned how to meet. Being a good man today isn't just about having a job or being loyal. It's about emotional intelligence, vulnerability, self-awareness, communication, and attunement. These are beautiful qualities, but they're also learned skills. When men don't feel confident in these areas, they internalize rejection as proof that they are fundamentally inadequate. And once that belief sets in, they begin to pull away, not just from potential partners, but from the entire process of dating or emotional risk-taking altogether. This fear manifests in subtle but powerful ways. They stop initiating, avoid defining the relationship, or end things before they get too close. Sometimes it looks like nonchalance or detachment, but beneath it is often the fear that if someone truly sees them, they won't be enough. Some men become perfectionists in relationships, walking on emotional eggshells, overthinking every move in fear of being judged. Others go silent, choosing self-protection over self-expression. The common thread is that rejection doesn't just hurt, it confirms their worst internal narratives. And when men carry these unspoken insecurities into relationships, it becomes almost impossible to fully show up. Not because they don't want love, but because they're convinced love might not want them. In the current cultural climate, we've gotten very good at calling people out, highlighting flaws, pointing to blind spots, naming behaviors that need to change. And while accountability is essential, when it comes to men, especially those who are trying to navigate evolving expectations in relationships, calling out without also calling forward can be deeply counterproductive. Many men are aware that the old ways of showing up no longer work. They hear the critiques, they see the memes, but what's often missing is the compassionate invitation into a new way of being. Men don't just need to be told what they're doing wrong, they need to be shown what right looks like, and more importantly, be believed in enough to grow into it. There's a vast difference between shame and challenge. Shame says you're not enough and you never will be. Challenge says you're more capable than you realize and I see what you could be. Most men are not unreachable, they're just guarded, and many of them, whether they show it or not, are desperate for someone to believe in their emotional potential. When we approach men from a place of judgment or frustration, we often trigger their defensiveness or retreat. But when we engage them with belief, curiosity, and clarity, we give them permission to step up without shame. This is what calling men forward looks like. It's about drawing out the best in them, not just criticizing the worst. That doesn't mean excusing poor behavior or lowering standards. In fact, calling someone forward requires higher standards, not lower ones. But it also involves guidance, encouragement, and empathy. For a man who was never taught how to communicate feelings, express needs, or hold emotional space, the invitation into that kind of relationship has to come with support. It's easy to say, be more emotionally available, but much harder to model what emotional availability looks like in real time. Men don't just need feedback, they need frameworks, they need language, they need safe spaces where growth doesn't mean humiliation and vulnerability doesn't mean losing respect. This shift requires partnership, not polarization. Women and men both have roles to play here, creating relational dynamics where growth is possible, not just demanded. When men feel called forward by someone who believes in their evolution, they begin to step into a more grounded, emotionally present version of themselves. They start to see themselves as capable of love, not just in theory, but in practice. And while not every man will accept that invitation, many will if they believe they're wanted not just for what they are now, but for what they can become. Growth doesn't happen in the shadows of shame. It happens in the light of possibility. The emotional landscape of modern relationships has changed, but many people, especially men, are still trying to navigate it using outdated maps. The old rules of masculinity and romance, built on control, stoicism, dominance, and surface-level connection, simply don't apply to the kind of intimacy people crave today. Yet, when we strip away those rules without replacing them with practical, empowering tools, we leave people stranded. Telling men to open up or be more vulnerable without teaching them how is like handing someone a musical instrument and demanding a beautiful melody. Without education, modeling, and repetition, those new expectations become just another source of shame and failure. What's needed now isn't a rejection of masculinity, it's a reconstruction of it, one that integrates strength with softness, decisiveness with empathy, and presence with emotional depth. That kind of emotional retooling doesn't happen passively. It requires conscious, intentional effort, learning to identify and express feelings, understanding emotional boundaries, unlearning reactive behaviors, and communicating with clarity and care. These aren't innate qualities, they're acquired skills, and many men haven't had access to spaces that teach them. Therapy, mentorship, community, and relational feedback all play a role in this emotional education. When we treat emotional growth as a muscle that can be trained, not a trait you either have or don't, we shift from blame to empowerment. New tools also mean reshaping how men understand their value in relationships. For so long, worth was measured in terms of what a man could provide materially or protect physically. But today, relational value is increasingly defined by emotional availability, attunement, and mutual support. If we don't equip men with the tools to thrive in that paradigm, they will either perform outdated roles out of habit or opt out of relationships entirely, convinced they're not built for the new demands. But they are. Men are absolutely capable of this emotional evolution. Many are already deep in the work. What they need is permission to grow, language to understand themselves, and partners who meet them with both high standards and deep compassion. So where does all of this leave us? It leaves us at a crossroads, not just in the way we relate to others, but in how we relate to ourselves. This isn't just a conversation about men or about relationship or about modern dating. It's about the emotional evolution we're all being invited into, one that requires courage, not perfection, one where men are not shamed into silence, but called into their deeper strength, and one where connection is built not on performance, but on presence. The relationship recession is real, but it's not permanent. It's a reflection of a world in transition, learning to love in a new language. And the men who are willing to do the work, to show up, to unlearn, to feel more fully and love more bravely, aren't just helping themselves. They're shaping a future where love is not only possible. Let's not just criticize what's been missing. Let's build what's never been modeled. Let's give men the tools, the language, and the belief to become not just better partners, but fuller, freer human beings. Because when we do that, we don't just fix relationships, we reimagine them.